There we go. Namaste group. Welcome to the, I guess, second part of the Nakshatra project where we're kind of looking into the Rahu Ketu polarities. Um, in a sense, what I have for you today, what I've shared with you, I think you've all got the pages document, and it's a collaboration, and so of course you guys can all add to that, um, and do your own research, and we can really kind of build on this project together in a lot of ways. But I really feel what I've sort of done here, and I knew this was going to be very Rahu Ketu project. And today, I feel like I've just taken like a ball of string or something and bunched it up. And here's a bunch of stuff, and I've thrown this on the ground in the middle of all of us now, and we're kind of looking at this. Wow, there's so many details, right? So much history, so many little things. And then you get into the people and so many biographies to be written. And then this idea of Rahu and Ketu of like an 18-month transit. And so what does it mean in a biography? Everyone born in 18 months is there's something that's the same in them, right? And so we're trying to find that. And we're finding in these early nakshatras, like really it's like Revati, Rahu and Revati. And I flipped it in each chapter. And the reason I did that, I wanted to really be able to compare what the difference is between Rahu and Revati and Ketu and Chitra, and Ketu and Revati and Rahu and Chitra. Um, and so that's why I've got it organized this way. I think by the time we get to the next class, I'm going to totally change this. Um, and we're going to try to follow some of these timelines more in order because now it's breaking. I already have within each sort of section, well, 5 historical timelines we're following through this class. And so then if we flip it, then all of a sudden every class we've got 10 timelines we're following, and they don't follow each other. And so we'll flip that for next class. But it is something I do want to keep in mind as we're doing this course, is sort of comparing that difference between the Rahu and Ketu. Uh, Again, I don't think we'll be able to do that class to class because it's just going to be too much. It's already, wow, the overwhelming feeling of Rahu I have starting this class. And by that Rahu feeling, I mean just like I'm drowning here, guys. It's really so much. And and well, that's kind of part of the reason to do the class, right? And do this kind of stuff is to get that feeling of the Rahu and the feeling of the Ketu will come in because I'm sure at some point this is open to everyone to sort of play with. At some point, someone's going to delete a chapter, right? Ketu's going to come in and say, haha, look what I did. And we won't notice it for a week or something, right? And time will just go on and God knows what'll happen. And so we've opened the door to that as well by sharing this and saying like everyone can kind of add their own part, our own little astrology wiki. Um, and if there's any like computer programmers out there that wants to do an astrology wiki with me, I'd be very happy to get that going. So this is our own, anyways, our own mini Jyotish wiki. Um, so so we're starting off with this Rahu and Chitra and sorry, Ravati Chitra, I guess, culmination. Now, there's a lot of little sort of hypotheses that I want to sort of try to keep in mind as all this research is going. One of the things is that while Rahu and Ketu, there are always confusion. I'm trying to change something here. There we go. So I like it when I can see you guys. Um, some reason my screen is set up different. Oh wait, I know how to do that. Sorry guys. Got to learn all over again, new class. Um, I'll just share the document with you. You guys all have your own versions, but it's all the same now if we're all looking at the pages document. You'll notice as well on this, before I get started too far, let's just talk a little bit more. You'll notice, and I don't know if it's different, not all of you using Macintosh, so I don't know how different this is for you. but there's a section that might say collaboration on top, and another one says comments. And these are things like you can literally click on a word and add a comment, and that'll come up, and we'll be able to see, oh, what did they comment on this? And so there's little things that can be useful as you're doing the research, little things you just sort of click on it and make a little mental note and see if it's coming up in the different years or whatever it is, or if you want to make a comment, oh, maybe we could say this different or any of that kind of comment. And then there's another thing, collaboration here. Oh, move that thing out of the way. I'm always using find and replace on here. You can see with the years I go through like that. Um, but collaboration here, there's a thing that shows all the activity. And so it shows me every time, like you can see Dana stepped in there and she must have like fixed, I think she edited a little proofread something on the table, right? But it tells me that. And I suspect it'll tell you guys that as well. So you can go on there and see what everybody's sort of doing and changing. And I'll try to keep an eye on this every day. Um, yeah. And if you see, like, if you did something and you see I've edited, don't take that to heart. I probably didn't even know you edited that. I just thought it was my own little thing. And I'm just, you'll see, like, it's like Mike edited 40 pages this morning, right? So I'm always like, there's always going on, right? The other day it was 3,722 3 days ago, right? So, and that's like maybe I just added a period and so Mike edited a page. So that's kind of the project we've got in front of us. So, so we start with the Sravati Chitra energy, I guess. And so one of the things I really like about this is because it really breaks down this polarity between the two. And so here we got Pushan against Tvasa, right? And if we're starting with the Rahu and Revati, we've got a lot of that energy going more into the ferryman, right? The fascination is going into that journey, into that shepherding, into the imagine realm of the imagination, right? A lot of ways in that Ravati. And so a lot of that energy goes there. We'll see when we go through uh, a lot of the names. And now I've got my mind all twisted up because I've still been doing Ketu and Ravati and Rahu and Ravati, and my history's just messed. And so this class is going to be a disaster. Um, but that's okay. That's the joy of Rahu, right? You get in over your head and well, you learn something and you figure something out. So let's just keep going. Um, the other thing is, it's kind of interesting, like this difference between Ravati and Chitra, because Ravati is really this realm of the imagination. It's this really loose sort of no boundaries. Saw lots of things like the other thing we're going to run into with the Rahu and Ketu and the news, right? My dominant source is Google, whatever, 1921, right? That's my dominant source here. And so you're getting a lot of disasters. In the Ravati, it's like lots of gas explosions. It's amazing how much the gas is coming up in the Ravati. The the a lot of snow and ice, like just this general sense of really going out there and people taking these journeys that really sort of just expand the imagination, right? People are going into that imaginary realm. There was an area where there was like a lot of submarines sort of sinking, right? And that's that other, the deep, deep oceans, right? Where it's just imagination, really. And we can see that because the subs can't even go there. And so it's really pushing the boundaries, really crossing over those, really crossing our boundaries. Um, and some of it's successful and some of it's not, right? Sub sinks sometimes. And so here I am starting a Rahu and Ketu class in Ravati, and Rahu's all about drowning and sinking and all of that stuff. So we've got a lot of that sort of thing going on. We find as well that shepherding uh, sort of happening. I found a few things of children. Now, again, this is Rahu. My main source is sort of Google. What is it? Google, or sorry, Wiki News is my main source. Wiki 1921 or whatever. So Wiki is sort of the source, and it helps for a good outline, but you got to go into these things a little bit deeper. But when you go into them deeper, it sort of sets us up for another hurdle. I did this, I was thought, oh wow, look at all the train stuff happening in such and such a year. We'll get to it. Look at all the train stuff happening. And so then I went, oh, train stuff for that year. And then it brought up this like, wow, it was like, look at all the train stuff for that year. But then look at all the train stuff for the next year and the next year and the next year and the next year. And it's like, oh God, we're drowning in train stuff. Why is train stuff important this year any more than the next year? Right. And so this Rahu, this cloud, this kind of cloud is going to come in here all the time. It's like, on one hand, we were researching in order to shed light on things and to learn and to discover something new. But at the same time as we shed light on something, we make shadows in other places. Kind of. That's what the Rahu and Ketu is all about. Those shadows that are being made in the light, what we're not seeing, all the things that we're kind of missing because we're, oh wow, astrology, oh wow, Rahu and Ketu, whatever it might be, or even in the news, like, oh wow, Russia, Ukraine, oh my God, right? And so all of these little things are going to, well, they cloud everything, right? So they're certainly going to cloud this. Rahu really likes they say Rahu's exalted in Gemini. Some say Gemini, some say Taurus. But they say Rahu's exalted in Gemini. My moon's in Gemini, right? That's like where you get all this information gathering and all this like I don't know, maybe I'm like Abhigavanu Gupta talked about like the bumblebee going to all the flowers, right? But I'm going to go to Shirasha, so maybe I'm like more like the deer nibbling from all the different trees, right? Um, but somehow I'm gathering that as well here, uh, into this, whatever I've been gathering all this into. So we've got all these things that are sort of, anyways, clouding us. These are our demons. These are the things that these are the things that have kept people from doing this very, well, it's just a time-consuming project. But it's a very like anybody could do this. But it's all these clouds and shadows of, oh my God, it's too big. Oh my God, I can't. These are our limitations. We're often like, especially in the new age circles, especially in these modern times. And I've done it too. God, I've worshipped Rahu and Ketu and thought, oh wow, this illusion. And well, there's a side of that worship, but they are our demons ultimately, right? And so it's not so much that we should worship this Rahu and Ketu, but that's where we've got to face them. We've got to we've got to shed light on, I guess. But we've got to do it in very creative ways. Because if you just shine direct light on Rahu and Ketu, it's like Ketu is this mist. If you shine direct light into the mist, well, we all know what happens. It just diffuses everywhere. And you just see the light everywhere. Oh my God, it's God. It's the truth everywhere I look. It's the light. It's amazing. Ketu can be quite lovely that way. Rahu's sort of this other phase where you shine, he's a dark, misty light, right? So you shine the light on that, and you don't get that mystical glow of the mist. You really only see this darkness. It's almost like Rahu, like he steps in front of the sun, and so you don't see the light, you don't see Rahu lit up, you only see his shadow. And so you think you're seeing Rahu in a sense. And so they often talk of Rahu as being this imposter as well. This sort of, I think of them as these tricksters, like the two jokers in the deck very much. I'm back in Canada, so I'm sort of, back to the roots kind of thing. See the old cowboys and Indian stuff going on behind me there, all that kind of stuff, right? And so I remember this one author I used to read a lot, and one of the really great Native American sort of myths that just, wow, it just got me through my childhood. And that was the coyote energy. And he's the trickster. Right? And the coyote is, there was a Thomas King. I just recommended some of his books to someone. There were these beautiful books about stories and all these sort of Native American mythologies brought up to date in a sense. Um, but he also really liked the coyote. And it's just like we play these tricks on ourselves, right? That's what the Rahu and Ketu energy is. We we point outside and we blame outside when it's just Rahu and Ketu energy, right? So it creates this, that's how it creates division, right? And that's how it creates the fear. That's how it, well, that's where like fear is such a huge part. It directs like 50% of our lives at least. If we're, if we're kind of doing all right, 50%. If we're not doing well at all, right? Of course, fear is directing our lives fully. And if you're a great saint, well, maybe fear is only directing 20% of your life, right? You still putting some food in your mouth sometimes. So fear is there. It's a part of life that we have to kind of deal with. And a lot of that is Rahu Ketu, because once you have some fear, you don't really see that thing clearly anymore. It's sort of, it gets misty. It's almost like once you start pushing to either of the extremes, things get cloudy. Things get, oh, what is that? But when you come into the middle and you say, okay, there's fear and there's love, right? And you've got a nice balance between that, right? You get a nice balance. We're dealing with Chitra and Ravati here. You get a nice balance of the logical mind, the Chitra, the chitti, right? The Chitra. And so you get that logical mind and you get the Ravati, the Rev, right? The dream mind, right? And so here you're getting that polarity between this. And this is like, wow, this is so important in Vedic astrology, what we're doing. We've got to apply that logos, that logical mind, work with the details, make sense out of them, make some side of like I often call the astrology chart a pathology report, right? So we've got to look at all this numbers and all this craziness, and we've got to make a give our clients some advice, tell them something from this, tell them what's going on in their lives, right? Um, and they're not happy. We want to say, oh, well, your Saturn's in Cancer. And that's like saying, oh, your hemoglobin's at this level. They look at you and they go, well, tell me, what does that mean? Um, we really wish they understood hemoglobin, but we have to explain it. And so through that explanation, in a sense, and this is why shifting around a lot here, but this is why Rahu is exalted in Gemini, because that story can shift, right? It's like our own story. We can make our story anything we want. And there's healing through that, right? It's like just a crazy story. It could be anything. And everybody knows it's not even true because, well, it's just a story. But there's so much healing in being able to manipulate that story, right? Of course, that's what the media does, and that's what the news does, and even as I'm writing this, right, I'm putting my own slant on everything and touching on because God, I'm following Wiki News, like that's got that's the worst news source in the world, right? And so I've got to have my own comments and my own little say on some of this stuff, and then it provokes me as well because I'm going like, wait a sec, that's not how I remember that happening, right? And so then I want to go back and look at it and see, go, oh yeah, my news told me this is what happened. Um, and so we get that. That's not Rahu and Ketu. There's polarity. There's differences of opinion, differences in history, right? The victor is going to call that have one name for that day, and the loser is going to have another name for that day. And two people are going to see it in a totally, totally different experience, the same thing. And so that's sort of where Ravati has to open up and say, oh wow, it's a whole ocean of experience. So I tend to think Rahu does pretty good in Pisces as well, right? In Ravati, because it's such a huge space that Rahu can eat and eat and eat and eat, and he's never full. But it's like this research we're doing into astrology, looking into the news and the timelines, history. God, at the bottom, right? I've got the thing for ancient history, and it's hardly ancient history, but but it can go back, right? I think that's where we're going to find a lot of the gems as we do this. Is going to be in that last section of the ancient history because that's going to pull out only the most important events, right? In modern times, you've got Jesus, just the news. We just know everything, And so we're kind of overwhelmed. But you go back 500 years, and there's only a couple really important things that stood out for us in history. And so that's really going to sift through some of the Rahu and Ketu, I think, as we go back in time. One of the other issues I think I'm running into in this thing early is that we're doing 120 years, is what I'm kind of looking at closely. But that's, at least through the astrology chart, that's one cycle. And so I got a sense that we have to look at, say, like 520-year cycles and compare them to really see what the difference and the change is in those cycles, because this is the Rahu. There's not enough in 120 years, right? Rahu's like, I need more. Give me 520 years. I'm hungry. I can eat it. I can do it, he's saying. And Rahu's like, yeah, go for it, Mike. Somebody tell me no. So that's that Rahu energy, right? It gets very excited about things and it just wants, oh wow, we can do it bigger. Um, and so it's well, I can tell you right now, whatever my goals for this course are, I'm not going to achieve them because they're too big. Rahu and Ketu are too much in all the details of all of it. But we learn going through this, right? We kind of grow. So we get down to the body parts here, the abdomen, uh, what Ravati's the abdomen, the groin, the ankles, Chitra's the neck and the forehead. I was seeing as I was going through this, and again, I can't remember if it was the Rahu and the Ketu, but I was seeing as I was going through this, like one of the Pope lived through like 5 cholera epidemics, and most of the people around him were killed by cholera and stomach problems and things like this. And so, well, maybe Ravati. The other thing I noticed with the gas and some of the pollution is this Rahu and Ravati especially seem to really lend to water pollution, right? And so cholera as well as water pollution. You saw oil leaks and you saw things like this happening in Ravati, and to the air. Air and water really seem to take a beating with Rahu and Ravati. And so we saw a lot of that. So we're going to get those kind of problems in the body as well. So, and then in Chitra on the forehead, there was a few cases. Oh, what was it? It was a Ketu in Chitra, I believe it was. But he's one of these scientists studying the pineal gland. Right? And so he'd come up with all this, whatever a lot of what we now know about the pineal gland, right? He was one of the first guys to say, hey guys, look at this, it's pretty neat. Right. And so we get that in Chitra as well. And Chitra's kind of known for the magic too. So that's kind of like, oh wow, pineal gland and Chitra, this kind of witchy magic thing going on in Chitra sometimes. And so we get this kind of thing. That's the other interesting thing. Like Chitra's really, it's Virgo, it's the logos, it's all about the little details and everything like that. And so on the surface, we don't think of it as this sort of witchy, magic-y um, nakshatra in some ways. It's also this sort of blend of Mars and Mercury, who are the enemies, and we get that same blend going on with Ravati Chitra. Mercury Mars kind of pulls, and it's interesting that the Mars is actually on the Chitra side with all the details, and Mercury rules the Ravati side with all the imagination. And so it's almost like there's a reverse in these nakshatras already. It's already like they're sort of changed places. And so in a way, it seems to me Rahu and Ketu are kind of they're almost comfortable there. And so you get this sort of, I don't know if it's comfort going where no man has gone before. Like they're really going far out there, like in the submarines in the South Pole, this kind of thing. I was just before the class. I think it was the last note I made on the whole thing before class was. Then we get to more modern times. We get to the 80s, and it was like the Legend of Zelda comes out, and I thought, oh wow, nobody's imagining South Pole expeditions. They're playing the Legends of Zelda. But it was kind of funny to see these energies and how they play out and how they come out. And I didn't keep looking up into modern times to keep connecting that explorer energy, but I have to admit there was a couple sections that wasn't coming out clear. I was like, where's the explorer here? Where's the going beyond the limits here, right? And it was interesting with the South Pole expedition because there was two separate groups and they were kind of rivals, right? Two explorers who didn't like each other. And you get a lot of this sort of explorer groups. There are a lot of these like tough individual men and very competitive, right? So they're not going to give up their expedition because someone else is going to go, and they're not going to work with anybody else. And one of the funny things about a lot of these expeditions, and maybe this is this chitta energy, is you get these like groups of these like five alpha men going on this grand expedition to the South Pole together, and they're all heroes in their own right, and they have a tough time working together. There's often these internal conflicts, and that's also that Virgo energy of war. And got to do so much to sort out war because, well, all of history is war, and so you see Rahu or Ketu and Chitra and go, oh look, all the war, and I'm like, oh well, the whole world is in war. Uh, but we'll go screw that. We'll go get down to that and sort of let's see the wars that were taking place. Um, but the interesting thing is you got had a lot of like internal conflicts within the groups, within these very strong, powerful groups, and it was like sort of this idea of who's going to sort out the details. There was also this almost a competition of like whose imagination is bigger, who can dream bigger. Um, and that's of course the Rahu, right? Wants to really dream bigger up there. So we get these kind of things. Um, I didn't really. It's interesting to see the Maua tree and the Bilva tree together here at that because the Maua tree is well, it's most famous for Maua. They make almost like a Jägermeister. The tribals make like a Jägermeister whiskey out of Maua. Um, and very strong. I tried it once up in the hills. And the Bilva, the sadhus are taking Bilva to decrease their libido, right? To make it more easy to be shanti. Um, and they need that. You've got a bunch of old bachelors, right, that haven't had sex in forever. No woman wants to touch them, and right, some bubbas, if they can sneak it here and there, they go for it, right? But they need a little bilva helps kind of bring that down. And there's yoga postures as well that they use for that, to help decrease libido. So, but it's interesting that you get the chitra that's sort of decreasing the libido. And that's interesting. That's in Virgo as well, right? That's where you're fighting. That's where there's broken trust, broken agreements are going on. And so there's definitely is sort of a decrease in libido there. You got Mars there as well, right? He's going to say, well, Mike, you got to question this. I also realized another bias in my names. We talk about something like the libido. And the big bias, it really comes on the side of women in my collection of charts and names, historical names that we can get because, well, how many housewife charts do any of you have in your records? And now some of you women are going to get more than I am, right? Because I've talked about this before, especially the housewives are more likely to go to a woman astrologer. I don't get a lot of the housewives. I get the independent women, right? And so when we look at libido, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, look at all libido, oh, look at the women in there. And then I went, oh, all the libido, all the women in all my charts have strong libido. They're all strong, powerful, independent women. I have no charts of any other kind of woman. So there's Rahu and Ketu, right? What can we say? Shine a little light on them. And well, maybe this is my plea for housewives to come and get their astrology charts done by me. Um, we get some agreement in the colors here. We get this black and brown colors. Um, that's interesting. I want to keep that in mind. For some reason, the first thing that popped into my mind, it's because I've been studying a lot of history, was fascism, right? You had the brown shirts and the black shirts, and the secret police kind of stuff going on there. And I expect some policing kind of stuff going on in detective sort of stuff, especially in Chitra. Like that Mars and Mercury working together to cut and measure and analyze and understand things, right? It's a very sort of detective kind of energy in itself. There was oh, jeepers, who was it? We'll get down to it. A quote, maybe it was Tolstoy who said, um, those who the gods want to punish makes mad. And so, well, that's that Mars Mercury energy. It can really make a person mad, and the way a detective goes mad, right? And the way a researcher goes mad, right? Digging and diving and trying actively working with all that mercurial information and just go can make a good warrior, right? Because it's very flexible and coordinated in their action and the movements and the way they deal with knowledge and information. And that's one of the beauties of Chitra is that ability to coordinate all of that, right? And so it's very interesting that we start this project off with this Chitra Revati because the whole project really does almost epitomize this energy between the big dream that's way too big and the information and the details. And so I've been talking a lot about the Rahu side of that, and that's going to be common. And I want you to catch me once in a while and say, hey, Mike, what about Ketu? Because Ketu is really easy to ignore. That's what he is. He's just like the one you just don't see and you ignore him. Um, and so that's gonna happen very naturally in this class. I just gotta take a break here. But Ketu's gonna have an interesting effect. I had this expectation when I looked at the flip side of the Rahu and Ketu and Ravati. I had this expectation that one group was going to be like these really sort of serious scientific types just dealing with information and really that chitra side of things. And the other group I was expecting was going to be like these crazy dreamer literary folks. That wasn't as true as I expected. One of the things I sort of noticed in a lot of these charts, and this is going to come up all the time, all the way through this, was a lot of these people had a big change in their lives in their late 40s. Rahu and Ketu are said to mature at the age of 48. And if they're aspecting any planet, they've said this especially about Saturn, but I think it really delays the maturity of any planet. So if Rahu Ketu is aspecting Saturn, for example, Saturn doesn't mature at 38, he matures at 48, right? And these sorts of things sort of happen. So, but what I was noticing was these really big movements into maturity people were taking. Carl Jung, Tolstoy, uh, one of the Koch brothers who owns chemical conglomerates. So many, you won't get down to these names, but so many of these people, their late 40s, something happened in their lives where they looked over everything in their lives and they had these really big shifts. Like Carl Jung, it was his late 40s when he had the break, or sorry, yeah, Carl Jung, he had his break with Freud in his late 40s. And then he kind of left everything and went out to the lake and he started doing his retreat thing out at the lake. He was like, I'm done with this stuff, in a sense. Tolstoy did something quite similar. Koch brothers, Koch brother guy, and this is quite interesting. This seems to be quite Ravati as well. He was in a head-on collision on the runway with two airplanes. And this is like one of the richest guys in the world. I think he's in the top 20. And so his life flashed before his eyes, and he really turned to philanthropy after this and just started spending his money like crazy on cancer research and libraries and just everything you can think of. But something similar seemed to happen to a lot of these people. And again, I was looking for a difference between the Rahu and the Ketu flip, and I wasn't finding what I was expecting. Right? I was expecting one group to flip to spirituality and the other group to flip to materiality, I guess. And I wasn't really seeing that. I was seeing it was more, I don't know, everyone seemed to be flipping more towards the spirituality, more towards the Ravati side of things in a sense. Um, so let's just cruise down there. There's too much for us to sort of read all of this, but we'll see some of these. Um, there's a split too, like someone like Molly Ringwald, she was really advertised as this like sweet girl next door. And she was always like, I was absolutely nothing like the sweet girl next door. These Rahu masks. And so I get a sense like almost when she got to her later 40s is when she was really able to sort of take off those masks. It wasn't until she really got older. Tesla, of course, a lot of these people sort of, they're a little bit outcast as well. We talked about mentioned some of the explorers. A lot of these people want to live out and away from everything. Tesla, right? He lived out with the gypsies. Some say he might have been gay. There's not much known about his personal life. He was sort of staying away from everybody. Um, a lot of his patents were stolen, and he lost a lot of credit for a lot of things until modern times. Everyone started going, "Oh wow, this guy actually knew something." Um, but again, there's almost that sense in the Revati here of being way ahead of their time. So far ahead they're behind, almost, right? You get that sort of sense going on here. Uh, there's quite big dreamers. You get somewhere a lot of working in healing and sound with this Rahu and Ravati. A lot of these people I know, rocket techs, technical stuff, all of this sort of things going on. Mao, the communism, he's famous for the Long March. Uh, I get that sense, like even land journeys in Ravati are going to be really long, right? Going beyond boundaries. Tesla's wisdom, Woody Guthrie, right? He was this hobo folk singer singing about the gypsies and the hobos. I got that sense, trying to sort that out a little bit between Chitra and Hasta as well. But both of them really brought a strong sense of like the working man in a way. Um, One of the things I wanted to sort of start sorting out in history as well, and it's why I have to like this whole project is 27 chapters, and so I'll make it 54 chapters soon. Um, and that'll help me sort some of this out. But there was this really strong sense of the working man, the working class. John Lennon's song, the working class hero. I think I listed that in here somewhere. This really, the Rahu especially, really brought a fascination with that service class kind of people, the hobos, the not even the service class, but the poverty. A war on poverty got started in this. And I kind of laughed at that when I got to that because I was thinking about all these wars, um, and how all the wars just increase the thing they're going to war with. And an interesting thing in history, right? You got the war on terror and the war on drugs and the war on sort of poverty and stuff. But it was like, as you look through these things, it's like the war on terror, for example. For a while, it was like all the major cities of like New York and London, they were all under a big threat of terrorism. And they fought this big war on terror, and everybody knows they didn't really do anything. But the threat has gone away. It was only there when the advertisement for the war on terror, like these things sort of go together. And so then you saw I came to the war against poverty. And I was like, oh my God, not the war against poverty, because of course you saw all economic decline after that. And so everything they declare war on grows. It's a really horrible sort of Rahu and Ketu kind of thing, right? Of course, everybody's talking 1984, George Orwell. He was the master of Rahu. You want to learn about Rahu, read George Orwell. Um, so, anyways, you get a lot of these sort of like people that are really going out there. The rocket techs, right? He might have been in the lab, but he was going. He was like, he was the first one that said, "Man can go to the moon on a rocket." Right? Charles von Braun. Everyone, wow, right? And all this science fiction literature just blew up. So we get a lot of that kind of thing. Father of skyscrapers, right? Just going up there and building this stuff like nobody's ever seen. Sarah McLaughlin, I don't know, maybe it's her voice. I don't know if you know her. She's got one of these just incredible voices. There's another someone with a similar Celine Dion, right? These two singers, these female singers, it's wow, their voices, nobody goes there with their voice. So it's really kind of neat. Ip Man was interesting. He's famous for his martial arts, but he did a little bit of Secret Service work. And that was another thing that sort of came up a lot here was a lot of Secret Service kind of work. We talked about the policing nature of Chitra. Well, you throw the nodes into that, and you get a little bit of something secret going on, some secret police thing going on. Um, I think as well, you get into Rahu crossing the boundaries and going, you get that as well, crossing boundaries, going into like forbidden territory in a sense, right? Where you're not supposed to go. Sigourney Weaver, aliens, right? So even going up in space, a lot of space stuff was coming up. Um, Flying machines, even UFOs came up a little bit in Revati, the nodes and Revati kind of stuff. In space, once I started looking into space, it was like, oh, there's space stuff coming up everywhere. And so really we gotta, it's like superconductors came up all over uh, Chitraravati. Superconductor is something along the lines of like a way for electricity to pass and no electricity is lost at all. And so you can have a whole circuit of electricity and none of that electricity is lost. And so you get these, anyways, they're superconductors. That's why we have these supercomputers now. Um, but it's like I look at a lot of the science and I really have no idea what that is. But I'm sure if you look into the science of supercomputers, you're going to learn about Chitraravati. One of the things that seemed to be coming up in Chitraravati was like first trip around the world, first unfueled without stopping around the world. So these circumnavigations, right? That's what the whole polar thing, circumnavigation of the globe, of the world, of Shiva and Parvati, of right? And so a lot of that comes up going around. Um, right, even the rockets and things like that going around the world and all of this sort of stuff. So, well, here we are. We're in Chitravati. And so what a place to start. I wasn't even thinking that it would be this time when I started the class. I just wanted to flip all the nakshatras around and look at them backwards. So we'll start at Ravati. You'll notice as I'm doing this, all the charts I'm putting in, here's a hypothesis I want to keep in mind. So all the charts I'm putting in have Rahu in the ascendant. I'm turning them all to there. Um, this one's Red Deer because I just started it with the date and time of the class, and here I am, and here's our chart. A lot of them are kind of random. I think I'm using Varanasi as the main. Every chart is Varanasi almost. Um, but I've got a bit of a theory that especially when we're looking at the world charts and when we're looking at these world transits, I get a sense that we can turn the chart to this Rahu and Ketu polarity because that's that magnetic polarity. And it's like, well, here's the, I don't know, maybe the esoteric magnetic polarity that's happening right now. Um, the other thing I sort of noticed while I was going through, like looking at people's biographies, and of course, my whole world is Rahu and Ketu by now. But when I was looking at their lives, I was like, my God, their whole life is Rahu and Ketu. And so I want to kind of start looking at some of these charts in that Rahu Ketu polarity, right? And again, this is just a hypothesis, but I think we can sort of set the polarity of the Earth and the current transits by this. Um, and I haven't even hardly worked with this. This is something there's a lot of little things I want to play with in this research, right? We're doing astrology as science. So we're going to make a whole bunch of guesses and we're going to be wrong a whole bunch of times, but that's okay. The other thing I want to keep in mind with Rahu represents oil. And so I've always wanted to do this big study of like oil prices and oil supplies. Um, and so I want to watch oil. I want to watch that as we go through that. Um, because they say Rahu is exalted in Gemini or Taurus. Remember, I think he does well and let's go up to that. Let's go back. Oh, what happened to that? Really? Ah, oh, the first chapter's already been deleted. I'll have to see what happened to that. There's a whole chapter on Rahu and Ketu there. Just really nice charts putting them together. Um, it disappeared. It's there somewhere, I'm sure. So, so Oh God, Rahu. I knew Ketu would show himself eventually. Um, okay. So, oh yeah, I was talking about the oil prices and things like that. And so Rahu is exalted, and so I expect there to be like when a planet's exalted, there's more of that. There's an abundance of that. Right? So in the markets, anyways, when there's an abundance of something, the price of that thing goes down. Right? So when there's little of something, the price goes up, generally speaking. And so I kind of want to watch that. And so we'll expect when oil prices are high, for example, might be when Rahu is very strong. One of the things I also noticed, there's a bit of variation in the timings. It's not all like sometimes he goes through a nakshatra in 2 months, and sometimes he takes 6 or almost 7 months to go through a nakshatra. But it almost seems to me that when it takes only 2 months to go through a nakshatra, wow, he has power. But so that would be saying when a Rahu's moving faster, he has more strength. Um, it seems to be a bigger hit when he just zips through that nakshatra, whatever we get hit with. Um, for example, so these kind of little things we want to kind of watch. We'll flip this around. Yeah, here we get these big long walks. It was this Tolstoy and War and Peace. I'm doing pilgrimage, so a man on a 1,000-mile walk has to forget his goal and say to himself every morning, today I'm going to cover 25 miles and then rest up and sleep. And so this is what the Bhagavad Gita sort of tells us to do as well, right? Like forget that you have to walk 1,000 miles. Today you have to walk 25 miles and then take rest. That's it, right? Right now I have to do this. That's it. Don't worry about the 1,000 miles in front of me. Tolstoy is brilliant. I love going through and coming to these quotes because God, these people that, that we do charts for are absolutely brilliant. Um, so we get the popes. I talked about the workers' rights, the workers' popes. We got that especially here, right? Someone like Alexander Graham Bell, he actually did a lot of work in audiology. That's how the telephone was invented, was he was helping little deaf kids like me. So God bless Alexander Graham Bell. Um, so it might be interesting as well to kind of look into his life because the telephone, like that was a huge step to get us to where we're on Zoom as well, right? That was some of the early steps to get us where we are here now. He Some of these guys though, and Thomas Edison, great inventors. What I noticed with some of these guys was the story of who they were wasn't really very close to actually who they were. Like Thomas Edison, the great inventor, he owned a workshop with a bunch of, I think, probably more competent scientists than he, and he was just paying people to just tinker and tinker and tinker at a time when there was just like ripe for scientific invention. Alexander Graham Bell was in and around that time. He made a metal detector as well. He tried to find, I think, President Garfunkel got shot, and he tried to find the use the magnet. Now, that's important because Rahu and Ketu is the magnet as well. And so I really got my eyes on anything that's using magnetic polarity, right? At some point, I really want to look through the history of just really this time of when they were making all their discoveries in electromagnetism. But that magnet, and so he was trying to use that to find the bullets in Garfield. He was unsuccessful at the time. The bed was full of springs, right? It was Rahu trying to use Rahu, and he had his own Rahu there that was blocking for being successful. Um, I see Rahu just all over these people's lives. That's the whole thing that's just propelled them forward, propelling all of us forward. Michael Jackson's an interesting sort of character here. He's another one. It's like half the world sees this guy as an enlightened being and the other half sees him as a creep. Now, he had these songs like he's most famous for like Thriller and Billie Jean and these early songs. Uh, that was the other thing in Chitra, right? It has a lot to do with the makeup, almost like the clown makeup or the makeup that we saw like Michael Jackson was all about the sort of outfit. and the makeup and the what they're wearing. We see that with the popes as well, really about the outfit and that image sort of idea. Tolstoy as well, really sort of dressed like a saint. You see that outfit coming up a lot in this, the makeup, you could say, right? Or the accessorizing, all of that sort of thing going on. Michael Jackson as well. We talked about the Secret Service or something like that. He really I don't know, at least when I think back to Michael Jackson, I see him in this, like, he was in this military sort of, and he had all these badges, and he was like this little tin soldier sort of boy. But he also wrote these beautiful songs like We Are the World and the Earth Song and Black and White, Man in the Mirror, and these really, he grew up Jehovah's Witness. He claims, he says he read the Bible every day of his life. Um, he really wrote a lot of songs to try to unite people, and that started happening later in his career. He started almost realizing the power of Maya, the power he had with this Rahu and Ketu. Um, he made the whole like theme park of his home for children and all of this. Uh, at the end of the day, the Rahu and Ketu bit him in the ass, right? Because couldn't he couldn't control the images that he was projecting out there, you could say. They got just too crazy on him. And that's really the illusion of Rahu and Ketu. And he got swallowed up by the Rahu, right? And he got all the accusations. And even today, like as I look at the news to that, even I remember it a little bit when I was younger, all that accusations of him. It's like, as far as I could tell, every single person involved in that was lying. More Rahu and Ketu. It was like how do you sort any of that out to find any truth? Right? And that's Rahu and Ketu in a sense. Everybody's lying. But he was like Michael Jackson. To say God is not everywhere is like saying a fish is like a fish saying water is not around him. I don't consider myself religious in order to form part of a dogma in particular. I consider myself to be spiritual. I think there's a field of knowledge in which our experience, our universality, our Pisces. I read all kinds of religious literature because I believe that the truth is in all of them. This is Michael Jackson, but this is like I found this kind of sentiment going on all the way through this position. It was almost this very scientific spiritualism that these people have. Carl Jung had some placements here as well, right? Even like what we're doing is very like scientific spiritualism in a sense. We're really combining the scientific methods and research with a just let go and discover and looking for the universality in all these little details. So in Tolstoy, just looking to unite and bring people together. Um, man, this is so chitra. Man is like a fraction whose numerator is what he is and whose denominator is what he thinks of himself. The larger the denominator, the smaller the fraction. Right? You'll have to read that yourself 5 times to sort it out. But that's kind of chitra as well, right? The Rahu and Chitra. Free thinkers are those who are willing to use their minds without prejudice and without fearing to understand things that clash with their own customs, privileges, and beliefs. This state of mind is not common, but it's essential for right thinking. And that's again what we're trying. We're trying to really open our minds and reach beyond our customs. And heaven forbid we reach beyond the customs of Jyotish and Vedic sciences and try to find something new out in the bigger, greater world that's there. So very, very fascinating. Chuck Norris as well. This was one of the things. It's very chitra. I remember my research from him before. Maybe I wrote it here, but he found this ancient water spring under his land, and so then I want to look. That makes me want to look like that's the same place we get oil from, right? That Rahu and oil, and so need to do some more research on this. But that really digging deep into the earth for water as well comes here for chemicals. Someone like Robert Koch, and he's libertarian as well, very free thinking and very free minded in the way he thinks. An American, when I was traveling through the U.S., an American called me a libertarian. Um, I don't know what I am, but that's the last anybody's called me anything. Um, so that's also I would say I've I've warned about this in spirituality. I've warned about this in everywhere. And maybe this is my danger about not defining myself politically, is that everybody else will define you, right? If you don't give yourself an identity, everybody else will give you one. And that's sort of like, well, that's what we get when on a first impression with someone, right? We look at them. I think this is a Tolstoy saying or someone. On first impression, you're judged by your clothes. On last impression, you're judged by your ideas, right? And so that's that sort of confusion that comes in. The image, the Rahu and Ketu, the illusion of what's in front of us, right? And so we have to go with that. So we get all those people. So we get the whole Ukraine thing. I think that might have started just before this period. Uh, that's again the cloudiness and all this. But it was really just really kicking off this whole Ukraine revolution, all of that. The plane got shot down, and um, I think this was the first time Ukrainian president went to U.S. to beg for money. And so since 2014, this has really been going on. And again, that cloudiness of the war, the cloudiness and the disagreement of the Virgo energy here. It's like we keep calling this Ukraine-Russian war, but all along everybody's like, that's an American-Russian war. That's a NATO-Russian war. But you have the nodes that are throwing this cloudiness into all of that. Um, so you get all of this sort of thing going on through here. A lot of things with air pollution, not just air pollutions I was seeing in this, but we had some of the COVID stuff. There were some bird flus. There was some cow diseases. There was just generally the air was unhealthy, right? Whether it was a chemical or a disease, it was like that was the I don't know the fear inducing of Rahu and Ketu, I guess, right? All the car bombs and that explosiveness of of all the gas and all of that. We get like the survivalist. I can't remember. Like he killed a bunch of people, and there was a big manhunt. And he went off in the forest, the USA, for months and months. It was almost like a First Blood Rambo thing. This guy was like really hardcore. Get a lot of hackers releasing private stuff, and that sort of foggy, cloudy hacker war. The proxy war, I think, sort of comes into this to a certain degree. Um, yeah, Obama announced the big shift in immigration, right? The common sense approach, and that's sort of like, oh, just give all the illegal immigrants their papers. And in the U.S. now, you hear geez, everybody's crying about the problem with immigrants crossing their borders, and this was probably the beginning of that as well, right? Again, I mentioned that crossing of boundaries and stuff, things just sort of open up. Um, but not in a proper way. This is Rahu Ketu again. Um, so you'll see so much of the leading in this. So let's just go back to history a little bit here. Yeah, let's go to the 20s. Why not? So, or 1902, we'll look at here. I just wanted to have a look at the charts on the side again here. So, a couple of things I want to keep in mind with this when you're looking at these. And I put them to a date there, and if you look, oh, this thing happened on that date. I didn't care about the time. Any old time that's on there is there. But one of the things you kind of want to watch is Rahu and Ketu, but kind of keep an eye on where Saturn and Jupiter are, because these are, of course, all the big transits, and so we're going to see some of the effects of having like Saturn or Jupiter aspecting Rahu or aspecting Ketu, these kinds of things. I can remember looking at one period in time and I thought, oh my God, that's just a god awful period of history. And I looked at it and Saturn was in debilitation. And so, oh, okay, so that's why that's why it's even worse. Um, so again, a lot of these kind of things will come up. As I said, we're not going to get through a lot of this, but amazingly, I'm right on time, right? I have to go through at least 2 chapters, I think, a class if we're going to get through all of them. I'll have to do my math. It's probably 4 chapters um, once we get it, but now it's 2 chapters in one kind of thing. So amazingly, I'm running right on time. Imagine that. So we get to Revati and Hasta. And so we're still dealing with a lot of the imagination type stuff. Um, Hasta is an interesting nakshatra because it's very sun and moon. It's ruler is the moon, but its god is Savitur, right? And then it's in Mercury. Um, and so the duality is strong with this one, you could say. Uh, it's that potter's wheel. I get a sense with the potter's wheel, it's that spinning, but it's more that craftsman in a sense. That service who's sort of like making things and fixing things. But he's also working with the water, working with well the water and the sun in a lot of ways. Um, there's a I would there's actually a lot of similarities in a sense between say Savitur and Pisces. That servitude is that inspiration. Hallelujah. That discovery that I think where Chitra is much more technical. Hasta is a little bit sort of feels their way through things a little bit more. Um, but here we get the nakshatra rules. Before it was Mars Mercury, now it's Moon Mercury. And Moon Mercury are bigger enemies. Mars Mercury don't get along very well either. But Moon Mercury are quite big enemies. They don't get along very well at all. Um, but in a lot of ways, I don't see the differences here as much. The Revati and the Pisces is much more that transcendent quality comes into things much more. Where I find the Virgo nature of Hasta and Chitra is much more the working class. I have to do things. Have to, I have to fix something. I have to get what is sought. There's more sort of going after to get something, to to achieve a goal, you could say. And now that's oftentimes one of the remedies of sixth house in astrology or a Virgo is selfless service, right? It's letting go of trying to achieve a result from what you're doing. Because Virgo is very much about doing, whereas Pisces is very much about letting go of all of that doing. And so we get that sort of duality kind of coming through here. We get some Oh, we get Midas with Hasta. That's right. We get that aspect of gold here as well. Um, and as I'm saying this, like I just haven't been able to get to all of this, but but we might look for some kind of gold frenzy or something through Rahu as we go back to history. Might have to go a little bit into prehistory to find those gold frenzies, but that's oftentimes in times of war. A lot of people turn towards gold as well. And so you can kind of see how Virgo and Hasta, the goldness of Hasta might sort of go together in that regard. I did notice with the hands here, someone like Tamerlane had a couple fingers missing. I noticed some Dr. Spock, right? I could never do the Dr. Spock thing, but in the old days, right, the Star Trek thing, he did those things with his fingers like that. Um, I'll bet you one of you guys can do that. Um, but it was just sort of like funky things that they were doing with their hands in Rahu and Ketu placements and Hasta. Missing fingers could have been there, these sort of neat tricks. Probably going to be some double jointed stuff, right? Where people can bend their thumbs back and we'll see some of these sort of like strange hand things. I already talked about the abdomen with Ravati. I saw some stomach problems there. I was kind of looking for groin problems and things like this. They're a bit personal, right? Like you don't always get told about those in histories. Like, Oh, did Tolstoy have herpes? Maybe. Um, right. But it's not usually something people generally talk about. Some ankle problems here. Well, I hate to come back to Tamerlane, but he also liked Tamur the Lame because he had a bad leg as well. I think he was shot in the thigh or something. It was very Shiva myth. But I think he was shot in the thigh. But anyways, I'm sure he had a bad ankle as well. So so we can look for some of these sorts of like unique body parts. One of the things I noticed a long, long time ago was especially with the Rahu nakshatras was that these people just about always Rahu causes some kind of problem in that nakshatra. Now sometimes it's just a mark, an unusual like a birthmark or something, right? Otherwise it can be wow, you don't even have those fingers at all. That's generally Ketu takes them away completely, but anyways, we'll see these sorts of things with Rahu and Ketu. We look at the um, we look at the trees here. We see the maua and the mango, or the jasmine tree. Jasmine is gotta sort that out. Mango or jasmine, they're very different trees. Jasmine, of course, is the beautiful fragrance, and not every jasmine tree seems to have the same fragrance. But I tell you, you get the trees down in Goa and South India, and you get a smell of a fresh jasmine. Oh man, it's incredible, incredible, beautiful, beautiful scent. And the mango trees, they're really huge. The monkeys love them. Well, monkeys would love the mangoes and the mawas for the same reason, because the monkeys would use the mangoes to get drunk, just like they use the mawa to get drunk. And so you see some agreement happening between the Hasta and Chitra through some of these energies. Um, Mango is an interesting energy because it's well, as far as I can tell, Mao was like Jagermeister, and Jagermeister was like, "Oh, you've got any problems with your stomach? Here, drink some Mao, drink some Jagermeister, drink some." In Eastern Europe, my friend he traveled there years ago in the early 90s. He said he didn't drink, but he was like, you had to drink vodka with your dinner, or you the meat, everything was rotten. And so otherwise you'd get sick. But if you drank the alcohol, then it would kill everything, all the bacteria in your stomach, and you could survive a meal in Eastern Russia or in Eastern Europe at the time. Um, and so alcohol can be a good thing that way. I know myself sometimes it's like I'm not much of a drinker. I'll have once in a while, even a festive drink. But sometimes stomach problems too. I'll be like, just give me a shot of whiskey. I'll be fine. Um, so so we can use these things as well. But mango is interesting because it balances all doshas. Um, in a sense, you could kind of say the same for Gayatri mantra. You can recommend Gayatri at sunrise, especially. Anyone can do Gayatri at sunrise. Now, any Brahmins listening to this might get very mad at me because this is supposed to be for Brahmins. It's a secret, sacred mantra, and it's supposed to be reserved for Brahmins. But you can say anyone can do this mantra because only a Brahmin can get up an hour before sunrise every single day to do a mantra. Nobody else will find the power to do that. So, if you want to find out if you're a Brahmin, or if you have strong Brahmin energy, because of course all the castes are mixed now, but do the Gayatri challenge. Now, I mentioned in the email, did I mention that? Because I do so much writing and so much more thinking, and I don't know what I write and what I don't. But I should mention that some nice mantras, like there's Rahu and Ketu mantras you can do for this course if you want to do them. I would recommend like a Ganesha for Ketu and Durga mantra for Rahu. And I would say just the common mantras for them. If you're not into mantras, just the common Om Gang Ganapataye Namaha and Om Doom Durgaye Namaha. Right? Nothing, you don't have to do anything fancy about that. But these would be nice mantras to practice during this course. I don't know what's going to happen. Like, this to me is just a very mundane course. We're working with some information. We're going to get a little confused here and there. But Rahu and Ketu does have potential to like really well, it can really throw your thinking for a loop. It can really throw anybody, saw a person off. And so if it does that to any of you, feel free to talk to me. We'll have a chat about Rahu Ketu or how they're affecting your life, right? Um, but it's interesting anyway. So we get some similarities in the energies here. You get the garden and the pond. Garden is an interesting one because garden in Hindi is bag. Um, yeah, bag. I got to watch pronouncing H's and A's in Sanskrit and Hindi. I'm not very good at them. Um, but anyways, garden is bag, but a kind of a generic word for God is Bhagavan. And so you get a play with that. It's almost like the garden is that like the garden is the thing that feeds you and creates you and keeps you going. And so there's a sense of that. The ocean of milk as well comes into Ravati. So that thing that nourishes, right? There's a bit of that nourishing quality that's going on in there. And then you get the pond and Hasta, which is interesting because the Ravati is in the ocean, and there you get the garden, and Hasta is much more like the land. Or that's the other thing. The hills was coming up a lot in Hasta. Hills, mounds, some of the volcanoes. There's some volcanoes underwater that created new islands while this transit was going. So those kind of things were coming up. But the place it rules is the pond. So you get these kind of like funny things with these nakshatras. They always want to like, oh, I got it figured out, and then they go, oh, no, it's not a hill, it's a pond. Um, but you can't have a pond unless I guess you have a hill. In a sense, I got maybe not even just a hill, but there's people they get the dimple in the chin. A hill like that, a hill that has a pond in it, I guess, right? Sort of idea. I don't know. I'm always reaching. So here we get brown and deep green go together. Very what can you say? Very Rambo, right? It's camouflage, brown and deep green and all these sort of colors. Now, something else I want to keep an eye on as we're doing this project is the directions, because I expect that Rahu. So here we are, Rahu and Ravati and Ketu and Hasta. So Rahu, I expect, is going to bring some magnetic polarity to the east and release some from the south. Now, they're not always going to be at square angles to each other like this, right? We'll get them sometimes. It's all kinds of. So we'll get some north-south sort of polarities here. And so, but I want to look. I want to keep some of these directions in mind and just see if there's anything that's really being pulled there or pushed away from those areas. Um, right. So maybe in the south, right, the kings are being disposed of or something. When Ketu's there, they're losing maybe, and people who are living in the east are gaining with Rahu. Now I say that, but it's like losing for a time and gaining for a time, because they don't go on forever. So little things like this, I want to sort of keep an eye on as we're doing these things. As I said, they don't have to go looking for trouble. It seems to follow them around. That was one of the things. Someone like Molly Ringwald, one of the things she was like her most famous movie. God, I can never remember the name of these things. Her most famous movie, she was like a high school kid on detention, right? So that sort of kind of punishment of Virgo in a sense, that imbalance. It was like it was a show about a bunch of kids who had ADHD and behavior problems, right? And so you get these sort of things going all the way through Chitra. Oh, Tom Waits. I love Tom Waits. Everybody knows I'll hear Tom Waits all the time as I do the nakshatras. But we start with Tom Waits. Look at this. But he's got like this song, Baby You Gotta Hold On. And that's that hasta energy, right? You just gotta hold on. You gotta just hang on. And that's in a way, that's the Rahu energy. That's as much as as common as it is to say let go with Ketu, you don't hear a lot of people saying, well, Rahu, you just got to hang on. And so that's really kind of anyways, again, that polarity of Rahu and Ketu. So, cruise through this. Oh, there we go. We got Ramdas. Be here now. Go to here's Carl Jung. The Last Crown Prince, Van Habsburg, Tamerlane. Oh, yeah, I did a whole bunch of people in this one. Dale Evans was that really powerful sort of female cowgirl, early woman in Hollywood who kind of defied the limits of being a woman. And I found that a little bit as I was going through the history of this periods as well, as there seemed to be like some of that woman's empowerment, right? Anyway, just again breaking those limits, going beyond those kinds of boundaries as well, to a certain degrees, the boundaries of what it means to be a woman in the case of Dale Evans. And now I say that, but she was still like a Hollywood darling back in the day. But she was tough. She was cowboy. She had a gun. Um, so you get a lot too. There was a lot of stuff was coming up to do with language as well. Um, like Willie Mays Hayes, say hey kid, right? That hey, uh, and I don't know why I noticed that so much in Hasta. There's a few nakshatras in particular. It's like Hasta, the ha ha. Like even now, it's like a war against Hamas, right? Um, that ha seems to come up a lot. Um, so this kind of thing. There's William Shatner, Dr. Spock, and William Shatner, the captain, and his right hand man going on there. Aha, made me lightheaded. Um, so um, yeah, Jeepers, we'll go through a lot of this. This is another thing that seemed to come up. Like this fellow here, the police officer, he invented the breathalyzer. A lot of handheld sort of gizmos and gadgets seem to come up with Hasta placements of Rahu and Ketu. These kind of things were quite popular. Um, I think even Dale Evans, like she was the old like I don't know, must have been like a 1950s Western cowgirl kind of thing. So the whole flipping of the guns and the whole like all of that sort of hand stuff there. She probably lassoed as well. Um, that kind of stuff. Oh, there was another. I talked about that detective energy. I mentioned it with Chitra, but here we are with Hasta. We get Alan Pinkerton. That was the Pinkerton Detective Agency. That was even before FBI and all of that. He was strike breakers and all that, but it was the private eye, the private investigator sort of stuff. And then we get who is he? Rupert Murdoch, the news guy. Back in the day, news used to be investigative journalism was like the big thing. Um, there was actually, I found it here, there was actually a law early on in media. It's a good time to talk about this. Early on in media, that in USA at least, there was a law passed that television channels and news media had to be fair. They had to offer both sides of the story. And then there was a period, and I think it was actually through this transit period, where that law got scrapped. And so then all of a sudden, news media and stuff like that, they could just go completely biased on one side of the story. There was nothing holding them back from doing that. And so, well, that's that imbalance we see in the Virgo energy, that tearing apart of things, like that. So there's Carl Young. Oh, Carl Young, right? He's just so all over everything that we're doing that has any relation with astrology or psychology. Um, he's all over all of it. And he worked like psychiatric hospitals again, that going away energy. So that psychiatric, the hospital, the facility going away, the pilgrimage going away, the he was like, I actually I recently, some of you probably haven't known this. I recently like just like I don't know. To me, it felt like an acceptance. And I turned Carl Jung's chart to Scorpio ascendant. He's got Mars there in Scorpio. And it's like, that looks a lot like your chart, Mike. And I went, you're just going to have to accept that you and Carl Jung have a lot in common. And it's amazing that I do have a lot in common. Like growing up, he like my mom worked at a psychiatric facility and we lived way out, like it was like way out in the middle of the woods in Canada. And I grew up on the grounds of this kind of psychiatric facilities and things like this. Even his travels, like he came to the Americas way back in the day, right? To get in and see the myths of the Red Indians is kind of how he saw it back in the day. And he went to India. India was one of his last ones. He went to India and he got so sick and he was just like, I'm never fucking traveling again. That's it. And and he didn't. He had enough. India was all he could take. But he got into Africa and studied like tribal mysticism, and so there's actually a lot of similarities between me and Carl Jung in our, and that has nothing to do with Rahu and Ketu. It does because it's my illusion. I'm going to tell you my illusion, and so so anyways, if you're looking at Carl Jung's chart, try turning to the Scorpio ascendant. And Dana or some others might be laughing when they hear this because in the last class I went, I turned his ascendant to something else and I went, I think this is his ascendant. Check this out, guys. So grain of salt, everything, right? Um, but that's not sort of like that division between the logos and the imagination, right? Trying to bring these things together. It is a primordial, universal idea that the dead simply continue their earthly existence and do not know they are disembodied spirits, an archetypical idea which enters into immediate visible manifestation whenever anybody sees a ghost. It's Rahu and Ketu, the ghosts, right? They're going to be everywhere. It's a primordial, universal idea that the dead simply continue their earthly existence and do not know they're disembodied in spirits. They're an archetypical idea that enters into immediate visible manifestation. That's what Rahu does. It's like, oh, it's real. It's not real, right? That's really like one of the main ways Rahu really gets us is I talked about this trickster energy, the coyote energy, right? It's like, oh, it's a problem. I have to fix it, right? And then you start fixing it. There was no problem, but now there's a problem. This I noticed this with a lot of the people as well, and I imagine a lot of these people doing this, these technical people, right? These are like they grow up and they're little kids and they're just taking everything apart and putting it back together. And sometimes it works again, and well, sometimes it doesn't. Uh, but that's really some of that Rahu and Chitra. It's that fascination, right, with all the details and parts, and so they want to take it all apart and see what it's made of. But they get in over their head, and so they're trying to put it back together, and they're like, oh, right. And so some kids will get really good at like labeling everything and doing that, and some kids won't. Sorry, kids. Um, so and you get like a kid like Tom Waits, and I don't know if he was very good at taking things apart, putting back together. Not really. He seems to me like he probably had ADHD and probably learning problems in school. But man, could that guy play a guitar? And again, this is the hands, that Hasta thing. He also had a little bit of a funny way. He plays his guitar very high, and he does this so he can kind of walk around and he does this. He kind of has a funny way of doing that way he does it. So um, and this is really some of the energy here. They hung up a sign in town, if you live it up, you won't live it down. So she left Monterey, son, just like a bullet leaves a gun. Oh, you've got to hold on, babe. You got to hold on. Take my hand. I'm standing right here. And so this is some of that energy, right? Of getting away, getting out of there. Escape is a really strong energy. And we see that from like these small towns in Canada anyways. It's one of the things I noticed actually when I was traveling in eastern Canada and Quebec. Because when you go to Western Canada and the prairies, it's like all the kids want nothing more to do than get the heck out of small towns. And small town Western Canada are these like small little dead places where old people stay because they can't afford to live anywhere else. Um, and so they're just dead empty. But when I was in Quebec, and I noticed this in India as well, you go to villages and they're thriving. The youth are staying there. There's something, and in Quebec, it's because there's not very much Quebec culture. if they go anyplace else, they lose their language, they lose their culture, they kind of lose everything. But this is sort of where I noticed there was some Dust Bowl energy in the 30s came up through this, right? Where everybody had to go and just migrations all across North America. And so you get that it's a big part of modernity. It's just moving away from the village, leaving the farm, leaving the place. But you get some still cultures are still sticking by their village. Um, but the energy here is much like get out of the village. So any village kids born with this Rahu and Ketu, they're like a bullet from a gun, right? Toni Morrison, there's an example. She got the heck out of there. Jeff Bridges has this as well. Now, this is the other thing but again, this maybe it's just my ghosts, right? So we're dealing here with a Rahu and Ketu in we'll say in Virgo Pisces, really is what they are. But as I'm doing all of this, I'm relating a lot to so many of these people. And my Rahu and Ketu is in sixth house and 12th house. So the nakshatras are different, but there's an overlap in the energy of the houses, right? And so these are signs, but my Rahu and Ketu in the houses are very similar. And so you might kind of want to keep an eye on that as well. So yeah, so if you know people that have the 612 Rahu and Ketu, you can kind of look at this and go, oh yeah, okay, I can see that. Especially Rahu in 12th house, it's going to be so much like Rahu in Revati or Rahu in Uttara Bhadrapada. Um, so something I'm still working on is trying to get some more of the history for the whole Palestine-Israel conflict, because of course there's events that happen all the way through that. One of the other things that I got to keep an eye on is like, well, for example, the revolutions, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and then all like it was like that. But what happens is it's like one place has the revolution, and then bang, 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 you get this domino effect through history. And so that's also going to cloud this whole study because it's going to be like, well, where was the first revolution? Where was the very first one that set all those other independence movements or all those other things in Trek? And so you might get all these events from, well, here there's not much, but you get events from Israel-Palestine conflict here, but where was the root source of that energy? The other thing is what we have to do then is look into this in our own detail and say, well, what was it about this particular Israeli settlers being evicted? Well, there's the eviction. Um, that makes it relate with this Pacific Rahu and Ketu position. The other thing is I'm trying to do the Nobel Prizes in here, and I'm just throwing that in. They hold those awards on the December 10th of every year. It started since 1901, I think, was the first time they did it. Now, a lot of these are the energy of that happened before the award, right? The discovery or the release of that. But this will help give us some idea. I think the reason I did it was give us an idea of history of what's going on in science and sort of give us a place in that. But what I've noticed is looking at some of these, I thought, oh, that actually relates more with the previous transit or like that. And so again, it's kind of a grain of salt. It's anyways, there's a big target where you don't have to hit the center of it every time to get something. So this kind of stuff. Uh, British Airways, here we go, more superconductor type stuff, right? Woodstock of physics, Woodstock of superconductors. Bet that we'd all just enjoy that. Um, HIV treatments. That was another thing that came up a lot through this sort of was blood. So HIV treatments, vitamins in the blood types were all discovered through this kind of stuff. So it's kind of in that sense, I see it as like all those little critters that are in the blood, right? All those little critters that are in the ocean. All those little, I want to look into hormones. I expect much more for hormones to be coming through Ravati. Um, and of course, then we get the connection with the forehead with Chitra. Yeah, I'm gonna get there's gonna be so much confusion. Um, but I do expect to look into hormones. But again, once we look into hormones, is we have to try to broaden that through the whole 120 years or through a whole cycle of these transits. So we get this thing. I talked about oil spills, a lot of kidnappings and things like this as well. That sort of, again, that being pulled away, being taken away. Um, oh, look at that, Canada. One of our last constitutions, I think, was signed in this period. So Canada's as well. Canada has so much of that escape energy, that getaway energy. Anyone I talk to around the world that wants to come to Canada, they don't want to come and see Toronto. They're like, oh, the mountains, oh, the nature, oh, the nothingness, right? They want to come here to escape. And so that's right. That's like our Constitution has some of that energy. Very exciting. Um, so it, I have so few Canadian clients, it's ridiculous. So nobody cares about the Canadian history part but me and four other people. And sorry, all the rest of you. You'll have to do the histories of your own countries for me in more detail. But we get these like really powerful Chinese Revolution, Spanish Revolution, the Indian independence was all going on in the 30s. And these independents, I want to break free sort of sense was going on through a lot of this. The Cold War, like this is a 120-year thing. The Cold War is like 60 years of that, right? And so something like that almost covers this whole sort of study. Um, so we'll see the buildup of that pull of dualities again. Um, Jeepers, look at what's happening now. Is the Cold War even ended? Um, right, the Berlin Wall came down, but there's still very much a division, right? The Russia's saying, no, you can't have NATO in these countries. I don't care if I own them or not. And US is saying, well, I don't care. We want to cross boundaries and we want to keep pushing. So like that, that's some of this. I talked about the going around the world by ship, by airplane, some of this stuff. There was a little bit, Porsche was founded. There was like a Formula One race also started in this period, somewhere as well. That's the other thing. Before the Cold War was basically the Ottoman Empire. And that was that whole other line between the East and the West. Then we had a bunch of wars and we sort of, I don't know, changed ownership of who ruled each side of the line, I guess. But you got things like the first Boy Scout stuff. There was the first Girl Scout stuff. That spirit of exploration. Britain started every year. They have it still goes on. They have a big long. It's a big hike. Um, that goes up to I think it's a 1 day thing, but the really strong they have different levels. But the strong people are doing like 50K in a day, sort of idea. That sort of stuff. Get Tarzan of the Apes. Um, that's just like Sleeping Dog. No difference between the two. Um, so we get a lot of this kind of stuff going on through periods of history. And more of that fascination, working class with the poverty stricken, with the marginalized. Ah, here it is, the working class hero. As soon as you're born, they make you feel small, giving you no time instead of it at all. It's pain, it's so big you feel nothing at all, right? The working class hero. When they've tortured and scarred you for 20 odd years, right? That's Rahu and Ketu period. Um, when they've tortured and scarred you for 20 odd years and they expect you to pick a career and you can't really function, you're so full of fear, right? That's how Rahu and Ketu. They keep you doped on religion and TV. That's all Rahu and Ketu John Lennon's singing about. And that's his own Rahu and Ketu. Just fascinated with that fear and the cloudos and the shadowiness of it, right? And sucked into it. It's like Well, that's what the whole caste system sort of is, right? It's like once you're in a caste, you're sucked into that. You can't really, well, if you've learned to weld for 20 years of your life, it's very hard to go on and be a lawyer after that. It can be done, but that Rahu and Ketu sort of says, no, it can't. That magnet, that sort of that draw that I guess you just can't break free of. So we get like that. You ever get the Marconi? That was another thing that sort of came, especially with this combination. Like Emmanuel Marconi, he wasn't born in a really wealthy family. They were doctors, but kind of middle class doctors. And so he got his start and he went to a good school for his master's of philosophy. I've talked to these people. When you do a master's of philosophy at a top school, you go into corporate banking, you go into secret service. Um, what I'm told, if you do a PhD at one of the top 5 universities, they're on the top of the list for suicide, actually. Um, so don't do a philosophy degree if you want a long life. Um, so it's tough. I meet some of these people in Varanasi, right? They did the PhD in philosophy. They took their job in secret service or in some super high branch of politics, of advisory kind of positions, right? And then they're in Varanasi drunk on vodka at 6 o'clock in the morning. Happens, man. So it happens. Ask Ringo Starr. He probably knows all about that. And that's interesting, even for someone like Ringo Starr, because you look at his life. The Beatles was just like that was just a blip on his radar screen of his life, right? It made his whole career after that, but it was really just this big like Rahu Ketu. There was this big fascination. Oh my God, the Beatles and Ringo Starr, and wow, 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 and that stuck with him. But I don't know if he might still be alive, but he's just Ringo Starr, right? He's not John Lennon, right? And that's even interesting as well because you see a lot of assassinations and things like that. I don't know again if that's his position, but you saw a lot of assassinations here as well. Um, and that's that imagination of Revati. If someone like John Lennon really lives in our imagination, the Beatles, they live in our imagination. You hear about that all the time. They go, oh, Trump lives in the imagination, lives rent free in their heads. The saying you hear now. But that's sort of what this position is this Rahu is getting. It's putting this kind of cloud into the imagination. Um, like that. African expeditions in the early days. Uh, I've added, I'll mention this again, I've added a whole bunch of explorers to the whole Nakshatra project since I've released the Nakshatra project. Um, so that's really exciting stuff. I should mention as well, so I talked about probably before the next class, I'll start moving this. It might still be in flux. I wanted to do it after the class, but I have no time after the class. As soon as this class is done, I go to Toronto and then I go to Spain. And then God, I'm off, and God help me if I pick up a laptop for 6 months. Um, I need to make money. I'll pick up the laptop. I can't afford not to. But anyways, a little bit of vacation time is what we're going, my escape, right? Hopefully. So, but the other thing I'm going to do with this project eventually is I'm going to take all of the Rahu and Ketu stuff out of the main Nakshatra project. Just wipe that out completely. And of course, whatever is useful here, I'll probably do it in 2 full sections so that instead of adding anything to this, what will be 54 chapters, I'll have another, like it'll be like part 2 of this book that will be all of it'll go into Rahu and Ketu in each house, right? And the transits, the natal stuff and all of that. And so then there'll be 2 nakshatra projects, all the planets and Rahu and Ketu. So that's the overall plan for all of this. So um, I won't tell you what I'm doing next year yet, but I already know. It's like it just opens for me. It's easy. I just have to do the work. And and this is the fun work. I like this. I thank you guys for this because this makes the Nakshatra project a little bit fun for me. Because otherwise, sometimes I feel like all I'm doing is like adding parentheses, deleting semicolons for 6 days, right? Uh, that's really what you're paying me for. Otherwise, read it yourself, and you'll probably learn much more than you do in this 2 hours of me talking. But hopefully it works like young Marchand did in his early political campaigns. En marche, forward, move forward, something like that, right? Keep going, right? Just keep moving forward. And there's going to be mistakes, and we can sort them out, right? Um, so like that. Yeah, Mike Pence, very religious. Presidents of Trump's others, Newton and Faraday. Faraday was actually, it was neat to go back to Faraday because he was Einstein's inspiration, right? So everybody were going, oh, wow, Einstein. And Einstein was like, oh, wow, Faraday, right? And that was that. Well, for these inventors, that Rahu is really what pushed them on. Anyone who's doing research, anyone who's going beyond their boundaries, what Rahu does, even in our Mahadasha period, he takes us out of our little box that is our life, and he allows us to see something new. And a lot of times you go, well, I'm not ready for that. Or life says, well, you're not quite ready for that. But have a look. Maybe later in life you'll get there and you'll be ready. Um, and so that's what Einstein did. Went, oh my God, Faraday. Can I ever reach the level of Faraday? Right? And then he Einstein, and now we have Elon Musk going, God, they're going to think of me like Einstein someday. Um, oh, Elon Musk, isn't he a fun one? Uh, he's just so like perfectly inappropriate all the time, consistently inconsistent. Um, so he's beautiful. So Martin Sheen, I talked about some of these masks and things. It's like Martin Sheen. Martin Sheen. No, I won't even. I should read this before I say anything. Oh yeah, sure enough, I had him confused with one of his sons. This was something that came out like he went into Apocalypse Now, but Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, right? That idea of God, that was a brilliant book. I got to read one of the versions. It was signed on the front page. It was a schoolhood edition by one of the great princes of India. He's still one of the richest people in the world. So I was reading all his school book literature from his library. And Heart of Darkness, I read all the Conrad stuff. He was a big Conrad fan. He had it all note and underlined. I love it, right? Like the King's underlining. Um, that's me. Oh, the King's underlining. The little working class boy that I am. Um, so so I was all fascinated with the Heart of Darkness. But there's a lot of Heart of Darkness in this combination because that was like going into the rivers of Africa and really exploring into our own heart of darkness is what we want to do here. We should always be doing that 24/7, exploring our, oh my God, I'm an asshole. I didn't realize it. Right. Um, because we love it. Like give the beggar a couple dollars and you go, oh, I'm a great person. Look how good I am. Right. I'm such a, right. We love saying that, but we really have to open up the darkness. What do we got going on here? It's called moon phase. Oh, Ringo Starr. Oh, Ringo Starr and his watches and his again, I think that's some of that Virgo energy, right? Really fascinated by the watches and what they do, but he had this like moon cold um and there is something with watches here that I don't think of it because my other friend Adam has this. And he's like, I had no idea. I just stumbled across it one day on, I don't know, it was like Instagram and he's got like a watch page on Instagram, and they're always like he owns all these watches. He has little right. I was like, God, Adam's a watch guy. I had no idea. He's like a black belt, triple black belt martial art engineer. You'd never know he was a martial art guy either. He's an engineer. He's a dopey engineer dude. who has a triple black belt in that and loves watches, and hates engineering. I love Adam. He's great. Um, so yeah, you got some of this. This is some of that nationalist poetry, back from the Napoleonic Wars. But this was really like a lot of his poetry, actually, like Marines have picked up their poetry. They chant his poems while they're marching, and things like "My wounds are deep, my pale lips quiver of death. I feel my fainting heart resign its strife. They're reaching now in the limit of my life. Lord, to thy I yield my parting breath." And it's like the soldier, he doesn't care, he's dying. This was written when he thought he was dying, actually, but he's going out there. That sort of war, military, get a sense of the, like, Revati is the Rev, right? But I really get a sense of that's like, the little drummer boy in the army, right? The Revatis, especially with Rahu, intensify. So you get that, and his poetry is really the little drummer boy almost marching into war, marching band type poetry. Um, oh, there we go. There's the SETIs, the extraterrestrial. Uh, the sound, no. Oh yeah, this sound, the wow moment. I didn't pick it up until later. I was doing some other looking and wandering, and the sound actually came from the area of the sky that we consider Abjit. There was like this sound came from space, and everyone was like, "My God, aliens!" Right? It was like, "Wow, amazing!" Everybody went crazy. You can imagine all these like these UFO geeks, right? These scientist geeks hearing a sound from their SETI, like, "Wow!" But it came from the area of that Abjit at the end of Scorpio, and so there's aliens. If you want to find the aliens, they're up there in Abjit. Um, but it came when Rahu and Ketu were transiting over here. And so maybe Avjit, maybe they're really over here, right? Maybe that was just they were tricking her. So, anyways, UFOs, all of that kind of stuff. Oh, it's great stuff. Um, Even like Walt Disney's Bugs Bunny came out, Fantasia came out in this kind of a transit, and so it was really going out there, all that magic and aliens. Was ET? I don't want to say it, but I'm going to. ET maybe came out in this period as well. Um, oh, this was another thing. The day the music died. This is, I don't know if you know this song, "The Day the Music Died." Drove the Chevy to the levee. I think it's the same one. The levee was dry too, right? Rahu and Ketu, they dry up the moon as well. So, anyways, the levee was dry, but this was a song about the musicians dying, and Buddy Holly and all his band and the producers and all this died in a plane crash. That was in the 50s. In the transit in the 1970s, Leonard Skinner's plane just put out a big album. Did I put the name of the album? The name of the album had some importance here as well. But anyways, so he put out this album, and like a week later, Leonard Skinner's a bunch of his band members. Was Leonard Skinner? Too much cloud. But anyways, it was at least a bunch of his band members died in a plane accident. So it's like there's something. Is there something in this transit killing musicians by crashed airplanes? I don't know. Anyways, at least two periods how did it happen. Um, Oh, things like fiber optics, communications. I think there was some of like the cables being laid across the Atlantic through some of these periods and that sort of thing. How much time we got? We're down to about 10 minutes. Is there any questions or any comments or anything anyone wants to throw out there? Oh, was another the Night of the Tomb, The Hobbit. Again, we talked about the oh no, that doesn't no. It's funny when I want to say something and I'm like, no, actually, you're completely wrong. Uh, what I was going to say, I was going to talk about the chitra, right? The chitra is all like the accessories and the makeup and all of that. But there seems to be some of that going on here as well, especially like in the Hollywood productions, right? That imagination is being being stretched. And so the costumes of the hobbits and the whole aliens type costumes and some of that rubbery, stretchy sort of stuff also seems to be very Revati, like this. We saw so much stuff happening with ice. Oh, this is the period. Oh, I don't have the chart for that. Anyways, some more of the ice type stuff going on with this. Again, just going out there, going past. Oh, that interpole that's supposed to say. I don't know. You guys, some of you guys are young, and this is a very fast modern world. But I'm sure you like DVDs, right? You still watch those things at the beginning. There's like an interpole warning that comes up, and it's like a copyright protected and blah blah blah. Well, that was back in the 19, where am I here? Probably in the 70s, maybe in the 50s. Anyways, and VCRs were coming out and all of that. But that was because what they saw was it was being spread out so far and there was kind of no boundaries. And so the whole Interpol, the whole movie industry was like, well, people are just going to copy this because they can, easy. And so they put out this Interpol warning and absolutely nobody listened to it. People just copied like crazy. Um, there's a market in downtown New Delhi, and any country with a little bit loose laws will have markets like this. You can go, you can get any movie on the planet, any music, anything for like 5 rupees. Um, so Interpol warning was trying to stop that. Um, and now nobody even has to go to the market in Delhi because you just find it for free on this little box we're all looking at. I asked about questions. I don't see anybody's waving their hands. Questions, comments? Oh, there we go. Go for it, Dana.
Well, I don't even know how to ask this question because apart from Rahu and Ketu confusing everything, I'm also in a very deep Kali sadhana lately, so I'm I'm out there. But this is just a hypothesis that I'll have to study looking at your document a bit more and in these classes. But I was wondering, like, the polarity between Rahu and Ketu changing their place, like for example, Rahu and Revati and then Ketu and Revati. Maybe it's like the cause consequence of certain aspects in history, like a full moon, new moon kind of energy, like how the energy goes towards Rahu. I want to check that out. And then also I was thinking in another Kali way that in reality we're always blaming Rahu and Ketu, but Rahu and Ketu are actually the awakeners of the archetypal energies that are already there. They are non-existent in reality. What they do is they awaken the latent energies that are there in those historical moments or in our birth charts. Or so for me, it actually made a lot of sense when you turned the charts to Rahu and Ketu in the ascendant, because then what we see is those unconscious themes that might be awakened archetypally in those periods of time. So only something like that. And also with the
Yeah.
directions, I was thinking of Durga and the Ashtamatrikas also. So I have a lot of
Hmm.
things I want to look in your document and maybe make some notes there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. I did sort of see, like they talk about Rahu. Rahu makes karma, and Ketu eliminates karma. And so I was seeing a bit of a pattern of this where Rahu was making a bunch of karma, and then when the next period came, um, well, they were either dealing with a lot of times they were dealing with the outcome of the karma that was made 18 years before comes back and they start dealing with that again, um, in different ways. I saw that with some of the Iraq war stuff, like Saddam Hussein, for example. He was fighting the Iraq-Iran war. He was really good friends with America, using chemical weapons supplied by America. Hardly anybody said a peep, right? Oh no, that wasn't Saddam. That was Iran was using those, right? That Rahu cloud came in, and then the next period came in, and Saddam was the enemy of the U.S. And it's because of a lot of those karmas that he made at that time that he flipped and he became the enemy now. And now in the next period, we're sitting here, and it's funny. At least when it comes to Iraq, America's almost in the middle position. They're not enemy and they're not friend. They're sort of belligerently occupying the country without causing too much trouble. um, and so, but yeah, it's trying to track these karmas. That's really where I started to think, wow, we need to do like 520-year sections to, and I don't know why five kept coming up, and there was a reason for that, and I can't think of it now. But yeah, I really want to watch how the karmas are rising up and going away. Um, Here we go. The last person executed and beheaded by guillotine was in the 1970s. Rahu and Ketu are headless, right? So anytime I'm seeing anybody losing their head, I'm like, oh, look, he lost his head. Um, yeah, so all of this.
Well, Kali's number is 5, and time space, Kali, and all the patterns with I'm just obsessed lately, so I just see this pattern everywhere.
Yeah, well,
And the
that's maybe not.
headless
Yeah,
cutting head.
five is a very mystical connects all the knowledge together. We talked about that in other areas. So yeah, five it is.
But what you
Anything
said,
else?
like they awaken the energy like in a spiral way with these periods of time, not only the 18 years, but the half time in between them, like the flip side of it. And I was just thinking when you were teaching, like it's like they are testing you, like in the after 6 years or the 9 years in between the 18 years, it's like Rahu and Ketu are testing you. Do you know what the truth is? Or do I confuse you more and then you reap those karma at the end of the 18 years kind of thing?
I was starting to get a sense with that late 40s thing. I was getting a sense it was like people were experiencing the full weight of all their karmas for their first 48 years, say, and it was all kind of hitting them at once. And then they had a little dark night of the soul thing, and a lot of them came out more sort of spiritually minded after that. But yeah, it did seem there was these seems to give these hits of karma. Like with Rahu, we think we're getting away without making karma, right? But it comes back, it comes later to get us, right? So Rahu, we kind of the naughty little boy, and I all got away with it. But we don't get away with anything. So hopefully we can find some of those patterns as we do them. And guys, really feel free to go into this and work with it on your own. I'll try to check every day the edits and just watch for those. I'll try to figure out what happened to that whole first. There was a whole first chapter, just general Rahu Ketu that's disappeared. So I'll see if I can find that. Anyways, I'm going to leave it at that. It's always a pleasure. And Mahadev.